Woman meets saints after death. Their prophecies are terrifying. NDE. Marianne never imagined that the day of her death would begin so ordinarily. She was in her kitchen, humming a tune as she prepared breakfast. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over her small, tidy home. Life was simple, predictable, and comforting. At 59, Marianne had long since settled into a quiet routine, finding solace in the familiarity of her days. But that morning, as she bent down to retrieve a carton of milk from the refrigerator, a sharp pain gripped her chest. It was sudden, overwhelming, and all-consuming. The carton slipped from her hands, the cold milk spilling across the tiled floor as Marianne gasped for air. The world around her began to blur, the vibrant colors of her kitchen fading into a dull haze. She felt herself falling, yet the impact she expected never came. Instead, there was a strange lightness, as though she were being lifted from her body. When Marianne opened her eyes, she found herself standing in a place she didn't recognize. The scene around her was both ethereal and unsettling. She was in a vast expanse, bathed in a soft golden light that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. The air was warm, yet it carried a sense of gravity that pressed gently against her chest. She looked down at herself and noticed she was no longer wearing the simple clothes she had been in moments before. Instead, she was draped in a flowing white garment that shimmered faintly, as if woven from threads of light. Marianne turned in slow circles, trying to make sense of where she was. The space was silent, yet it wasn't empty. She could feel the presence of something, or someone, watching her, though she couldn't see anyone. It wasn't frightening, but it was deeply unsettling. Then, without warning, a voice echoed softly in the air around her. "Marianne," the voice said, calm and steady, yet filled with an authority that demanded attention. "You have been brought here to witness what lies beyond." Marianne froze, her breath catching in her throat. She looked around wildly, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was no one. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice trembling. The golden light around her began to shift, forming faint outlines that grew sharper with each passing moment. Slowly, the shapes solidified into figures, 3 of them, standing in a semicircle around her. They were radiant, their forms glowing with an intensity that made it difficult to look directly at them. Each figure was distinct, yet they shared an aura of profound wisdom and power. The figure closest to her stepped forward. Though his features were obscured by the light, Marianne felt an overwhelming sense of peace emanating from him. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice calm and melodic. "We are here to guide you." "Where am I?" Marianne asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this place?" "You are in the threshold," another figure answered, his tone deeper and more resonant. "Between the life you knew and the truth that lies beyond. You have been chosen to see what many cannot, to understand the weight of existence and the choices that shape it." Marianne's mind raced as she tried to process their words. She felt her pulse quicken, though she wasn't sure if she even had a pulse in this strange place. "Why me?" she asked. "What do you mean, I've been chosen?" The third figure stepped forward, his voice carrying a weight that silenced her thoughts. "Because your life has been a thread in the tapestry of existence, one that has touched many others. You have seen much, but there is more you must understand." As he spoke, the golden light around them began to shift, forming shapes and patterns that danced in the air. Marianne watched in awe as the light wove itself into a vast tapestry, each thread glowing with a unique hue. The tapestry seemed infinite, stretching far beyond what her eyes could see. "This," the first figure said, gesturing to the tapestry, "is the fabric of creation. Every life, every choice, every action is a thread in this design. You are part of it, as is every soul that has ever existed." Marianne stepped closer to the tapestry, her eyes scanning its intricate patterns. She could see faint images within the threads, faces, moments, and memories, all woven together into a single, cohesive design. It was beautiful, yet there was something unsettling about it. Some threads glowed brightly, radiating warmth and light, while others were dim and tangled, their light struggling against encroaching shadows. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice filled with both wonder and unease. It means that every choice matters, the second figure replied. Each thread represents a life, and the light within it reflects the love, kindness, and truth that soul has carried. But there are shadows as well, born from fear, neglect, and harm. These shadows weaken the tapestry, threatening to unravel the connections that sustain existence. Marianne felt a chill run through her as she gazed at the darker threads. She could see how the shadows spread, their darkness touching the threads around them, dimming the light of others. "Can they be repaired?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," the third figure said, his tone steady. "But it requires intention. Love is the force that strengthens the threads, that banishes the shadows and restores the light. Every soul has the power to mend the tapestry, but many do not see the impact of their choices until it is too late." The words hung heavily in the air, and Marianne felt a deep sense of unease settle in her chest. She thought of her own life, the moments she had dismissed as insignificant, the choices she had made without considering their consequences. She wondered how her own thread appeared in this vast tapestry, whether it glowed brightly or was tangled with shadows. The figures seemed to sense her thoughts, and the first one stepped closer, his light enveloping her in a comforting warmth. "You will see," he said gently. "You will understand. But first, you must witness what lies ahead." The golden light around them began to shift once more, the tapestry fading into the background as the space transformed. Marianne felt her breath catch as the figures guided her forward, their presence steady and unwavering. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life, and the choices she had made, were about to take on a meaning she had never imagined. The golden light shifted as Marianne stepped forward, her heart pounding with a mix of awe and trepidation. The figures around her moved silently, their radiance casting soft shadows on the expanse that now unfolded. The tapestry had faded, replaced by what looked like a vast, endless plain. Its surface shimmered faintly, as if woven from countless strands of light, yet it pulsed with a living energy that Marianne could feel beneath her feet. The air was thick with a weighty silence, not oppressive but charged, as if the very fabric of this place carried a truth too profound for words. As she walked, she noticed faint shapes emerging in the distance, like whispers of form just beyond her reach. They became clearer as she approached, figures, moving slowly, each wrapped in a soft glow that distinguished them from the surrounding light. Unlike the radiant beings guiding her, these figures seemed human, their outlines more distinct, their movements deliberate. They appeared to be walking along paths that wove together and separated again, like threads on a loom. "Who are they?" Marianne asked, her voice breaking the heavy stillness. "They are travelers," the first figure replied, his tone calm but resonant. "Souls who have crossed into this realm, each carrying the weight of their choices. Some walk in light, others in shadow, but all are here to understand." Marianne's gaze followed one of the figures, a woman who moved with a hesitant, almost faltering step. Her glow was faint, and the path she walked seemed narrower, the edges darkened as though the light struggled to reach her. Marianne felt a pang of sorrow as she watched. The woman's head was bowed, her hands clasped tightly as if she were clutching something unseen. "What happened to her?" Marianne asked. The second figure spoke, his voice deep and steady. "Her path is the result of her choices. Fear, anger, and neglect have dimmed her light, weakening the thread that connects her to others. She walks now in search of clarity, to confront the shadows she allowed to grow." Marianne felt her throat tighten. She couldn't help but wonder if her own path would look the same. She thought of the moments in her life when she had turned away from others, when she had acted out of self-interest or failed to offer kindness. The weight of those memories pressed heavily on her chest. "Can she change her path?" Marianne asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," the third figure said, stepping closer to her. "But it requires understanding. To confront one's shadows is to face the truth of who you are and who you have been. Only then can the light be restored." As Marianne watched, the woman paused on her path. The light around her flickered faintly, as if responding to an internal struggle. Then, slowly, she lifted her head, her gaze meeting something unseen ahead of her. The shadows around her began to recede, her light growing steadier with each step forward. The path before her widened, and the darkness at its edges faded. Marianne's heart swelled with both relief and wonder. She had always thought of life as a series of isolated moments, disconnected from one another. But here, she saw how each step shaped the next, how every choice left a mark on the journey. The scene around her shifted as the figures led her further. The shimmering plain seemed to ripple, transforming into a great hall filled with countless doorways. Each door glowed with a distinct hue, its surface marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move. Marianne felt a pull toward one of the doors, its light faint but inviting. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This is the Hall of Reflection," the first figure said. "Each door holds the truth of a life, the choices made, the connections formed, and the shadows cast. You are here to witness your own." Marianne hesitated, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure she was ready to see the full truth of her life, to confront the moments she had buried or forgotten. But the figures stood silently, their presence both steadying and insistent. She knew there was no turning back. As she stepped toward the door that called to her, its light brightened, enveloping her in a gentle warmth. The surface of the door shimmered, and as she reached for the handle, the world around her dissolved into a cascade of images. They unfolded like pages in a book, each one vivid and alive. She saw herself as a young girl, sitting in a field of wildflowers with her sister. They were laughing, their hands entwined as they wove crowns from the blossoms around them. Marianne remembered this moment, how carefree and full of joy it had been. But the vision shifted, showing another scene, her sister standing alone by the same field years later, her face clouded with sadness. Marianne's stomach tightened as she recalled the argument that had driven them apart, the years of silence that followed. The light of the vision dimmed as the memory played out. She saw herself walking away, her shoulders stiff with pride, while her sister stood behind, her thread fraying as the connection between them weakened. Marianne felt a sharp ache in her chest. She had convinced herself at the time that she was in the right, that her sister's actions had justified her own. But now, she could see the ripple effect of that choice, how it had left a shadow not just on their relationship but on others as well. The images shifted again, showing another moment from her life. She was in a crowded grocery store, rushing through the aisles with a list in her hand. A young man in a store uniform approached her, his face anxious as he asked if she needed help. Marianne remembered brushing him off, too focused on her errands to notice the disappointment in his eyes. The vision followed the young man as he moved through the store, his thread dimming slightly with each interaction that mirrored hers. Marianne's chest tightened further as she watched. She had always thought of herself as kind, someone who treated others with respect. But now, she saw how small moments of neglect could cast long shadows, weakening the light of those around her. The images began to move faster, showing a cascade of moments from her life, times she had offered love and support, and times she had turned away. She saw the threads of her actions weaving into the lives of others, creating ripples that spread far beyond what she could have imagined. Each choice, whether made with intention or indifference, left its mark on the tapestry. As the vision slowed, Marianne felt a deep sense of both sorrow and hope. She understood now that her life had been far more connected than she had ever realized, that every interaction carried the power to shape the threads around her. The light of the door began to fade, and Marianne found herself standing once again in the great hall, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had seen. The figures stood silently, their presence a steadying force as she tried to process the enormity of it all. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she felt a growing resolve within her. Whatever came next, she would face it with open eyes and an open heart. The hall of glowing doors began to dissolve around Marianne as the figures guided her forward. The golden light softened, shifting into a landscape that seemed endless. The ground beneath her feet shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the infinite sky above. There was no horizon, only an expanse that stretched beyond what her mind could comprehend. The air was dense with energy, each breath filling her with an awareness of something vast and incomprehensible. Marianne felt the weight of her life pressing on her, the memories she had just witnessed still vivid in her mind. Every step she took felt like a step deeper into herself, into the truths she had spent a lifetime avoiding. The figures remained silent, their presence steady and unyielding, as though waiting for her to speak. "What am I supposed to do with what I've seen?" she finally asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "I didn't know. I didn't realize how much my choices mattered." The first figure turned toward her, his radiance glowing more brightly. "Awareness is the first step," he said. "But understanding alone is not enough. Action must follow." The words hung in the air, their weight sinking into her chest. Marianne's mind raced with questions, but before she could speak again, the ground beneath her began to shift. Threads of light emerged, weaving together into an intricate pattern that stretched out before her. Each thread pulsed faintly, their light revealing the connections that bound them together. Some threads were strong and vibrant, while others were frayed and weak, their glow barely perceptible. "These are the connections you have formed," the second figure said, his voice calm and resonant. "Each thread represents a life you have touched, whether through love or neglect." Marianne stared at the threads, her heart pounding. She could see how they wove together, creating a web that radiated outward from her. Each choice she had made, every interaction she had, was reflected in the strength or fragility of the threads. She noticed some threads glowing brightly, their light spreading far and wide, while others flickered weakly, weighed down by shadows. Her attention was drawn to one thread in particular. It was faint but steady, its light struggling against the shadows that clung to it. As she reached out to touch it, a vision unfolded before her. She saw herself standing in a crowded subway station, her arms full of grocery bags. A man sat nearby, his clothes tattered and his head bowed. Marianne remembered this moment. She had been in a rush, her mind focused on getting home, and she had avoided making eye contact with the man, hurrying past him without a second thought. The vision continued, showing the man's thread dimming slightly as he remained in the station, unseen and ignored. Marianne's chest tightened as she watched. She had told herself at the time that it wasn't her responsibility, that someone else would help him. But now she saw the weight of that moment, how her choice had contributed to the shadows around his thread. The scene shifted, showing what could have been. This time, Marianne stopped, setting her bags down and offering the man a bottle of water and a kind word. His thread brightened immediately, the light spreading outward as he sat up straighter, his face lifting with a faint smile. The vision followed him as he left the station, carrying the small act of kindness with him. The ripple effect spread, touching the threads of others he encountered, their light growing stronger in turn. Marianne stepped back from the vision, her heart heavy with both regret and understanding. She had always believed that her actions were insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but now she saw how even the smallest choices could create ripples that extended far beyond what she could see. The figures remained silent as the threads began to shift again, weaving into a new pattern. Marianne's gaze was drawn to another thread, this one brighter but tangled. When she touched it, a memory surfaced, one she had long buried. She was in her kitchen, her teenage son sitting at the table with a defeated look on his face. He had been struggling with school, and Marianne had been impatient, snapping at him instead of offering encouragement. She saw how his thread had dimmed slightly in that moment, the connection between them strained by her words. The vision shifted, showing an alternate possibility. This time, Marianne sat down beside her son, listening to him without judgment and offering her support. His thread brightened, the light spreading outward as his confidence grew. The vision showed him years later, mentoring others who faced similar challenges, the strength of their connection rippling into countless lives. Marianne felt a lump rise in her throat as the vision faded. She thought of all the times she had let her own frustrations cloud her interactions with her son, the moments she had missed to strengthen their bond. The threads around her pulsed gently, drawing her attention to another. This thread was dim and frayed, its light barely visible through the shadows. When she touched it, a memory emerged of a friend she had lost touch with years ago. They had been close once, sharing everything, but an argument had driven them apart. Marianne had let pride and stubbornness keep her from reaching out, and their connection had withered over time. The vision shifted, showing what could have been. This time, Marianne made the first move, calling her friend and apologizing for her part in the argument. The connection between them was repaired, their threads glowing brightly as they rebuilt their bond. The light rippled outward, touching others in their lives and strengthening the web of connections around them. As the vision faded, Marianne felt a deep sense of regret but also a growing determination. She understood now that her life was not defined by her mistakes but by her willingness to learn and grow. The threads around her shimmered, their light weaving into a new pattern that stretched endlessly before her. The figures spoke again, their voices harmonizing into a single, resonant tone. The tapestry of existence is not fixed, Marianne. Each thread can be strengthened, each shadow can be dispelled. But it requires intention and courage. Love is the force that binds the threads together, that restores the light and mends what has been frayed. Marianne nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had seen but also filled with a sense of purpose. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she was ready to face it, to carry the lessons she had learned into every moment of her existence. The threads pulsed brighter, their light guiding her toward the next part of her journey. She stepped forward, her resolve growing with each step, her heart open to the truth that had been revealed. Marianne's steps grew steadier as she moved deeper into the shimmering expanse, her mind heavy with the visions she had seen. The threads stretched before her like a living map, their soft pulses guiding her forward. She could feel the weight of their interconnectedness, as if every choice, every action, resonated within her. The figures continued beside her, silent but present, their radiance steady and grounding. The vastness of the place she now walked in no longer felt foreign. Instead, it felt like a reflection of something within herself, a space where the consequences of life unfolded in undeniable clarity. Her gaze was drawn to a thread that flickered faintly, its light struggling against the encroaching shadows that wove around it. When she touched it, a memory surfaced with vivid intensity. Marianne was standing in a line at a coffee shop, her thoughts preoccupied with an argument she'd had earlier in the day. A young man in front of her had dropped his wallet, scattering its contents on the floor. She remembered the moment clearly now, how she had hesitated, then stepped back to avoid getting involved, convincing herself that someone else would help. The vision showed the man bending down to retrieve his belongings, his thread dimming slightly as frustration and embarrassment rippled through him. The shadows that clung to his thread spread outward, touching those around him as the tension in his mood grew. Marianne felt a pang of guilt as she watched. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. It was a small moment, one she had dismissed as inconsequential. But now she saw how even the smallest interactions could leave an imprint on the threads of others. The scene shifted, revealing what could have been. This time, Marianne knelt down to help the young man, gathering his scattered cards and handing them to him with a kind smile. His thread pulsed brightly, the shadows retreating as the light spread outward. Later that day, the vision showed him paying that kindness forward, offering his seat to an elderly woman on the subway. The ripple effect extended beyond him, touching lives that Marianne would never know. The threads pulsed faintly as the vision faded, and Marianne stepped back, her heart heavy with the realization of how often she had chosen inaction. She thought of all the times she had justified her silence, her indifference, by telling herself it wasn't her responsibility. But now she understood that every moment carried weight, that even the simplest gestures could strengthen the fabric of connection. Her attention was drawn to another thread, this one glowing steadily but frayed at its edges. As she touched it, a memory unfolded of her teenage years. Marianne was in her high school classroom, sitting near the back of the room. A girl in the front row had raised her hand to answer a question, her voice trembling as she spoke. Some of the students had laughed quietly, their whispers cutting through the air. Marianne had glanced at the girl but said nothing, lowering her gaze to her notebook. The vision showed how the girl's thread dimmed slightly in that moment, her confidence shaken by the laughter and the silence that followed. Marianne felt a wave of regret wash over her as she watched. She had been afraid of drawing attention to herself, of becoming a target for ridicule if she stood up for the girl. But now she saw how her silence had contributed to the shadows that touched the girl's thread. The scene shifted again, showing what could have been. This time, Marianne spoke up, her voice firm as she told the others to stop laughing. The girl's thread brightened instantly, the light spreading outward as she continued to answer the question with growing confidence. The vision showed her years later, standing at a podium, speaking with poise and inspiring those around her. The strength of her thread rippled outward, creating connections that reached far beyond what Marianne could have imagined. As the vision faded, Marianne felt a deep ache in her chest. She thought of the moments she had let fear guide her actions, the opportunities she had missed to strengthen the threads of others. But she also felt a growing determination. She understood now that every moment held the potential to repair, to restore, to build. The threads shimmered again, weaving into a new pattern that drew Marianne's attention. This time, she saw a memory of herself at a community event, standing in a crowded room filled with strangers. A woman nearby had been struggling to carry a tray of food, her movements clumsy as she tried to navigate the crowd. Marianne had noticed but had turned away, focusing instead on her conversation with a friend. She had told herself it wasn't her place to interfere, that the woman would figure it out on her own. The vision followed the woman as she stumbled, the tray slipping from her hands and the contents scattering across the floor. Her thread dimmed slightly as embarrassment and frustration overtook her. Marianne's heart sank as she watched. She had been close enough to help, to prevent that moment from happening, but she had chosen not to act. The scene shifted to show an alternate outcome. This time, Marianne stepped forward, offering to take the tray and help the woman carry it to her table. The woman's thread brightened immediately, the light spreading outward as gratitude replaced her frustration. The ripple effect extended to the others at the event, the atmosphere lightening as kindness became contagious. Marianne stepped back, her mind racing with the weight of what she had seen. She thought of all the times she had dismissed opportunities to connect, the moments she had allowed hesitation or indifference to dictate her actions. She understood now that every interaction, no matter how small, had the power to shape the threads of those around her. The figures beside her spoke softly, their voices harmonizing into a single, resonant tone. Each thread is a reflection of the choices you have made, Marianne. The light within them is not fixed. It can grow, it can fade, and it can be restored. But it requires intention and the willingness to see others, even in the moments that seem insignificant. Marianne nodded, her resolve deepening. She thought of the lives she had touched, the threads she had strengthened, and the ones she had left frayed. She understood now that her life was part of something far greater than herself, that every choice carried the potential to shape the fabric of existence. As the threads around her pulsed with renewed energy, she felt a pull toward the next part of her journey. Each step she took carried the lessons she had learned, the weight of her past balanced by the hope of what she could still create. Marianne pressed forward, the glowing threads shifting around her, their patterns weaving and unwinding in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. The vastness of the space she was in no longer felt overwhelming but purposeful, as though every step she took brought her closer to an unspoken truth. The figures beside her remained steady, their radiant presence both a guide and a reassurance. She could feel the weight of their wisdom, their silence urging her to continue exploring the intricate web of her life and the connections she had made or failed to make. Her gaze fell on a thread that glowed softly, its light steady but muted. When she reached for it, the world around her dissolved into a memory. She was in her early 20s, sitting in a crowded waiting room at a clinic. A mother across from her held a restless toddler, her face strained with exhaustion. Marianne remembered glancing at them briefly before returning to her book, telling herself she wasn't obligated to get involved. The child began to fuss louder, drawing annoyed glances from others in the room, but Marianne remained silent, unwilling to leave the comfortable bubble of her own world. The vision played out, showing the mother's thread dimming slightly as her frustration grew. Her shoulders slumped, and the shadows around her thread spread faintly, touching the edges of others in the room. Marianne felt a pang of guilt as she watched. She hadn't been unkind, but she had chosen indifference, a refusal to acknowledge the struggle of someone right in front of her. The scene shifted, showing what could have been. This time, Marianne looked up from her book and offered the child a smile, reaching into her bag to pull out a small toy she had been carrying. The toddler's fussing ceased almost immediately, his curiosity piqued by the toy, and the mother's thread brightened as relief washed over her. The light rippled outward, shifting the atmosphere of the room. The mother's mood lightened, and she engaged with those around her, spreading warmth and connection. Marianne stepped back, her heart heavy with the realization of how easily that moment could have been different. She thought of all the times she had chosen to retreat into herself rather than extend even a small gesture of kindness. The threads pulsed gently around her, their light weaving into new patterns that guided her toward another memory. This time, the thread she touched was faint, its light flickering unevenly. The vision it revealed was one of her teenage years, standing in the school library with a stack of books. A boy in her class had approached her, his hands fidgeting nervously as he asked if she knew where to find a specific reference book. Marianne had dismissed him with a quick answer, eager to return to her own studies. She remembered the irritation she had felt at the interruption, the assumption that his request wasn't worth her time. The vision followed the boy as he wandered through the aisles, his thread dimming slightly as he struggled to find the book on his own. His confidence waned, the light in his thread growing weaker as he hesitated to ask anyone else for help. Marianne felt a deep sense of regret as she watched. She hadn't been cruel, but her indifference had left a mark, a shadow that spread through his thread. The scene shifted again, showing an alternate outcome. This time, Marianne put her books down and walked with the boy to help him find what he was looking for. His thread brightened instantly, the light spreading outward as he thanked her and returned to his seat with a renewed sense of confidence. The vision showed how that small moment had encouraged him to seek help more often, strengthening his connections with others and allowing his light to shine more brightly. Marianne stepped back from the vision, her thoughts racing. She had always prided herself on being focused and efficient, but now she saw how that single-mindedness had often come at the expense of connection. The threads around her shimmered, their light drawing her attention to another. This thread was brighter than the others, its glow steady and warm. When she touched it, a memory unfolded of her as a young mother, sitting on the floor with her son. He was building a tower of blocks, his face lit with concentration and joy. Marianne had been tired that day, her mind preoccupied with the long list of tasks she needed to complete. But she had chosen to stay with him, to match his focus and joy as they worked together. The vision followed the ripple effect of that choice, showing how her son's confidence grew as their bond deepened. His thread pulsed brightly, connecting to the threads of others he interacted with, spreading the warmth of those moments they had shared. Marianne felt a swell of gratitude as the vision faded. She thought of how often she had doubted herself as a parent, questioning whether she had done enough. But now she could see the impact of those moments, the way her love and presence had strengthened the threads of her family and extended far beyond what she could have imagined. The threads around her shifted again, their light weaving into a new pattern that drew her attention. She saw a memory of herself at work, sitting in a meeting with her colleagues. A junior employee had hesitated to share her ideas, her voice faltering as she began to speak. Marianne remembered that moment vividly, how she had sensed the young woman's nervousness and encouraged her to continue. The vision followed the ripple effect of that choice, showing how the junior employee's confidence grew over time, leading her to take on more leadership roles and mentor others in turn. Marianne felt a sense of pride as she stepped back from the vision. She had often doubted whether her actions made a difference, but now she could see the strength of the threads she had touched. The figures beside her spoke softly, their voices harmonizing into a single, resonant tone. Every thread you strengthen adds to the light of the tapestry. Each choice, no matter how small, carries the power to ripple outward, touching lives in ways you may never see. Marianne nodded, her heart heavy with both the weight of her past and the hope of what lay ahead. She thought of the threads she had ignored, the moments of connection she had dismissed, and the times she had chosen love despite her own struggles. Each thread carried a lesson, a reminder of the power she held to shape the world around her. The threads pulsed more brightly as she stepped forward, their light guiding her toward the next part of her journey. With each step, she carried the lessons she had learned, ready to weave light into the lives of those she touched. Marianne moved further into the glowing expanse, the threads around her shifting like waves in an unseen tide. Their light pulsed with a rhythm she could feel deep in her chest, a steady beat that resonated with the truths she had come to understand. Each thread seemed to call out to her, inviting her to touch it, to uncover another layer of the intricate connections that wove through her life and the lives of others. The figures remained beside her, their silent presence both grounding and expectant, as though they knew she had more to learn. Her attention was drawn to a thread that glimmered faintly, its light flickering as though struggling to remain steady. When she reached out to it, a memory unfolded with startling clarity. She was in a busy grocery store, standing in line at the checkout. An older woman in front of her was fumbling with her purse, struggling to count out change as the cashier waited patiently. Marianne remembered the moment. She had stood silently, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, feeling irritated at the delay. She hadn't said anything, but her impatience had been palpable. The vision continued, showing how the woman's thread dimmed slightly, the weight of her embarrassment and frustration adding shadows to her light. Marianne's own thread flickered faintly in response, the ripple of her impatience touching the threads of those around her. She felt a sharp pang of regret as she watched. At the time, she had told herself it wasn't her problem, that she had no obligation to intervene. But now she saw how her choice to do nothing had left an impact, however small. The scene shifted to show an alternate possibility. This time, Marianne stepped forward, offering to help the woman count her change with a kind smile. The older woman's thread brightened immediately, the shadows retreating as her gratitude replaced her frustration. The light rippled outward, touching the threads of others in the store, creating a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Marianne's thread also glowed more brightly, the connection strengthening her own light as well as the woman's. As the vision faded, Marianne stepped back, her thoughts racing. She realized how often she had allowed small moments of irritation or indifference to guide her actions, or lack thereof. She had never considered how even the simplest gestures could create ripples that touched countless lives. The threads around her pulsed gently, their light weaving into new patterns that seemed to beckon her forward. Another thread caught her eye, this one glowing more steadily but tangled with others in a complex web. When she touched it, a memory surfaced of her walking through her neighborhood one winter evening. A man she didn't recognize was shoveling snow from a driveway, his movements slow and labored. Marianne had glanced at him briefly, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, before continuing on her way. She had rationalized her decision to keep walking, telling herself that she didn't have the time to stop and offer help. The vision showed how the man's thread dimmed slightly as he struggled alone, his exhaustion and isolation casting faint shadows around his light. Marianne felt her chest tighten as she watched. She had always thought of herself as a kind person, someone who cared about others. But now she saw how often her actions, or her inaction, failed to reflect those intentions. The scene shifted to show what could have been. This time, Marianne stopped and offered to help the man, picking up a second shovel and working beside him. His thread brightened instantly, the light spreading outward as they worked together. The ripple effect extended beyond the driveway, touching the threads of those who saw their efforts and were inspired to extend kindness in their own ways. Marianne stepped back, her heart heavy with both regret and determination. She thought of all the opportunities she had missed, the times she had allowed excuses or convenience to guide her choices. But she also felt a growing sense of hope. She understood now that the threads were not fixed, that even the weakest connections could be mended and strengthened. Her gaze was drawn to another thread, this one glowing brightly but frayed at its edges. When she touched it, a memory unfolded of her sitting at her desk at work. A colleague had approached her, clearly upset, and had begun to share her frustrations about a challenging project. Marianne had listened for a moment, but her focus had remained on her computer screen. She had offered a few polite responses before returning to her task, assuming the conversation wasn't important. The vision followed her colleague as she returned to her desk, her thread dimming slightly as feelings of isolation and discouragement took hold. Marianne felt a pang of guilt as she watched. She had always thought of herself as approachable, someone others could rely on. But now she saw how her lack of attention had weakened the connection between them, leaving a shadow on her colleague's thread. The scene shifted again, showing an alternate version of the moment. This time, Marianne turned away from her computer and gave her full attention to her colleague, listening with empathy and offering encouragement. Her colleague's thread brightened immediately, the light rippling outward as her confidence grew. The vision showed how that small moment of connection inspired her colleague to persevere, leading to successes that strengthened her light and touched the threads of others. Marianne stepped back, her thoughts swirling. She thought of all the times she had allowed distractions or priorities to take precedence over connection, the moments she had dismissed as unimportant. She understood now that every interaction, no matter how brief, carried the potential to strengthen or weaken the threads that bound them together. The figures beside her spoke softly, their voices harmonizing into a single, resonant tone. The threads of life are woven with intention, Marianne. Each choice adds to the tapestry, shaping not only your path but the paths of those around you. To see another, to act with love and presence, is to strengthen the light. Marianne nodded, her resolve deepening. She thought of the threads she had ignored, the moments of connection she had missed, and the times she had chosen love despite her own struggles. Each thread carried a lesson, a reminder of the power she held to shape the world around her. The threads pulsed more brightly as she stepped forward, their light guiding her toward the next part of her journey. Each step carried the lessons she had learned, the weight of her past balanced by the hope of what she could still create. Marianne continued forward, her steps steady, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had seen yet buoyed by a sense of purpose. The threads around her pulsed in synchrony, their glow intensifying as if urging her toward a culmination. The figures beside her remained steadfast, their presence grounding her as she prepared to confront the truth of her journey. She had witnessed her life in ways she had never imagined, seen the ripples of her choices, and understood the profound impact of her actions or inactions. Now, she felt ready to face whatever awaited her. The shimmering threads began to shift, weaving together into an enormous, radiant tapestry that stretched infinitely in every direction. Marianne realized that this was not just a collection of individual lives but a vast, interconnected whole. Each thread was part of the same design, each life woven into the others. The beauty of it took her breath away, but she also noticed the imperfections, the frayed edges, the dim threads struggling to hold their place, and the creeping shadows that threatened to unravel parts of the design. "This is the truth of existence," one of the figures said, stepping forward. His voice carried both gravity and warmth. "Every soul contributes to the tapestry. Every choice, every connection adds light or shadow." Marianne stared at the glowing expanse, her chest tightening. She could see her own thread, interwoven with the lives she had touched. It glowed brightly in some places, where love and kindness had guided her actions, but it also had its shadows, moments of neglect, fear, and missed opportunities. She saw how her thread had affected others, strengthening some connections while weakening others. The truth was undeniable, and it filled her with both sorrow and hope. "Is it too late to repair the damage I've done?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It is never too late," another figure replied, his tone steady. "The tapestry is always in motion. Every moment offers the chance to strengthen the light, to mend what has been frayed." Marianne felt a flicker of determination ignite within her. She thought of the lives she had touched, the opportunities she had missed, and the love she had given. She understood now that her life was not defined by her mistakes but by her willingness to grow, to learn, and to act with intention moving forward. The tapestry shimmered, and new images began to form within its threads. Marianne saw a young woman standing in a crowded bus, holding a heavy bag while balancing on her feet. In the vision, Marianne stood and offered her seat, the woman's thread glowing more brightly as gratitude filled her. The ripple effect spread outward, touching others on the bus and creating a chain of kindness. The scene shifted, showing Marianne at a family gathering. Her sister, whom she had not spoken to in years, sat at the edge of the room, her thread dim and fragile. Marianne saw herself approach her sister, offering a heartfelt apology for the years of distance between them. The connection between their threads brightened instantly, the light spreading outward to touch the rest of their family. Another image appeared, this time of Marianne in a quiet park. A man sat on a bench nearby, his shoulders slumped as though carrying an invisible weight. Marianne saw herself sit beside him, offering a simple smile and a few kind words. His thread brightened, and the ripple effect extended far beyond what Marianne could see. As the visions faded, Marianne turned to the figures, her voice steady. "I understand now. Every choice I make, no matter how small, has the power to shape the world around me. I want to do better. I want to strengthen the light." "You already have," the first figure said, his voice filled with warmth. "The willingness to see, to learn, and to act is the first step toward mending the tapestry. Your light is not fixed. It grows with every moment of love, every act of kindness." Marianne felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She no longer carried the weight of regret alone. Instead, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She understood now that her life was part of something far greater than herself, that every thread she touched carried the potential to spread light into the world. The tapestry began to glow more brightly, its light filling the space around her. The figures stepped back, their radiance blending into the golden expanse. Marianne felt a gentle pull, as though the threads themselves were guiding her back to where she had come from. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. As the light around her grew brighter, Marianne heard the figures' voices one last time, their words resonating deep within her. "The light you carry is infinite, Marianne. Use it to mend, to connect, and to create. The tapestry is yours to weave." With those words echoing in her heart, Marianne closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the threads around her. She was ready to return, to carry the lessons she had learned into every moment of her life. And as she took her first step forward, the light within her began to shine.